Have you thought this through?
No way will that work.
Are you sure? Is there any money in that?
You'll never make any money doing that. How are you going to pay the mortgage? Just get a job.
You're going to try to sell that? Why can't you be normal like everybody else?
All right. Were your parents morons too?
The savvy entrepreneur to the rescue.
Congratulations. That really turned out well.
Really good job.
I'm surprised.
You know, I wish I thought of that.
I never thought anyone would. How did you do that?
I'm so glad you're pursuing your dreams. I wish I had the courage to follow my dreams.
Welcome to the Savvy Entrepreneur Show, everybody. We're broadcasting on WLCB 101.5 FM, based in the greater Chicago, Milwaukee area. If you're an entrepreneur or a small business person, this show is for you. I'm Doris Nagel, your host for the next hour. I'm a serial entrepreneur, and I've also advised startups and small businesses over the past 30 years. I've seen a lot of mistakes, and I've made a lot of mistakes myself. The show really has two goals: to share helpful information and resources, and two, to inspire you. Hopefully make your journey as an entrepreneur faster and easier, and maybe just a little bit more fun. To help with that, I have guests on the show every week who are willing to share their stories and advice. And this week's guest is Chris Banakis. Chris is the founder of Acuity Advisory Partners, which works with early stage businesses to develop innovative and effective market entry strategies. Prior to founding that, he held several senior leadership positions at Motorola Solutions. He also served as managing director of Motorola's North Asia operation. Now, Chris also volunteers as a mentor and a workshop facilitator for an organization called SCORE, which I hope most of you have heard of, but if not, you need to check it out. It's a nonprofit organization that has helped more than 11 million entrepreneurs, and their services are free, and they're a resource you need to check out. I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk with Chris a little bit more about SCORE today. In his spare time, which I find it hard to believe he has much of, but he's a mentor and a coach for the incubator program at the William Fremd High School in Palatine, Illinois. In addition to his consulting practice and volunteer work, Chris says he enjoys playing golf with his brothers, trying out new recipes with his wife, and having dance parties with his grandchildren, which sounds like just a lot of fun, Chris. So thanks so much for being on the show today, Chris. Welcome to the Savvy Entrepreneur Show.
Well, thank you, Doris. Delighted to be here, and Happy New Year. I think we're all ready for 2021 to begin, that's for sure.
I think we are too. You know, Chris, and by the way, folks, today what we're going to talk about with Chris is how to create a really good pitch deck, one that wins over investors and other folks in your audience. So, Chris, what is a pitch deck exactly?
Well, it's a great question. I think most of us think in terms of PowerPoint slides, someone making a pitch to an investor. And that's certainly one element that's used quite a bit. In its simplest forms, you know, it's words, it's images. You really want to tell the story of the venture. I mean, that's the whole purpose of it. And most pitch decks, if they're done well, they usually accomplish three things. One is they get people to understand about their business. Second one is they get them to care about it. And that's really an important element. Mm-hmm. But finally, hopefully they're going to take action, right, and do something about it. I talk about this in terms of even when we were very young, whether we were doing show and tell or doing a science fair, most of us have had some experience along the way doing a pitch. And so this is a process that has just continued, and it's a very effective way for entrepreneurs to tell their story.
So I think of it as kind of an expanded elevator speech. Is that sort of fair to think of it that way?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that an elevator speech is one element of a pitch, right? that might be a very quick one. We used to say, I think a lot of business people think in terms of you just have 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and you're going to make your pitch. Or it can be something more extensive. It can go on for a good period of time. Sometimes it's a narrative form. So it's really a variety. Some people like written. So, most of us think in terms of a presentation, but it also can be something done in a written format as well.
So, Chris, talk a little bit about your company, Acuity Advisory Services, and what it does, and then maybe how you came to be so passionate about putting together a good pitch deck.
Well, Doris, I was really fortunate during the course of my career. I worked for, you had mentioned the company I spent most of my career was with Motorola. At the time I was with Motorola, it was a very entrepreneurship type company. They really fostered that. The Galvin family really encouraged an entrepreneurial spirit. I mean, if you think about this is the company that launched the portable cell phone, which actually kind of came to being in the 1970s. It was launched in the 1980s. But at the time they developed that, there were pay phones everywhere that, you could pay 10 cents and make a call. The first portable cell phone went for $39.95, which today would be $10,000. $10,000 for the device.
Wow.
And the airtime was $1 a minute. Now, can you imagine pitching that idea to a senior leadership team? But that was the environment that we operated in. And most of the managers around Motorola always had a 3-inch binder, and inside their 3-inch binder, okay, Doris, I'm going to test your memory now, were transparencies. And we would put those on a little projector and lay those out. This was before PowerPoint. Most of us all carried those around. And so you never knew when you were going to come in contact with somebody to pitch your idea for a new product or service. And that's the environment that I grew up in. So
Wow.
it was an exciting place to be. And, as we even going overseas, you mentioned being in Asia. I mean, that was also an exciting environment where entrepreneurship was just a way of life. So after I retired from Motorola, when you talk about Acuity, one of the other things that Motorola was very big on is focusing on vertical markets. So public safety, electric utility, transportation, and then that was an area that I spent a good deal of time in. So after I retired, I received a call from a colleague who was interested in pursuing a new market. And from there, it just became a word of mouth with Acuity. And so I've been doing that for a number of years. But quite honestly, today, I really find myself spending a good deal of time with SCORE, doing more pro bono work. And I do a good deal of work with the Friend High School Group, which is really using a curriculum that was developed by an organization called Incubator EDU, which is kind of a fascinating story unto itself. I'll just real quickly mention that they actually, the program was developed in 2013 at a Barrington High School right here in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. Today, and it started just at Barrington, today there's 375 schools in 27 states. It includes Hong Kong, Australia, Japan. And what they've done is they've brought together business professionals to work in conjunction with the business teaching professionals at the high school. So it's a real collaborative learning environment. They're giving the students real-world applications. And I've been doing it for about 6 years now. Great students launching their product. They actually pitch at the end of the year to kind of a Shark Tank kind of environment. And they can get investments of $20,000 to $40,000 depending on the school and how they're operating. And so there's some, they've launched some pretty exciting businesses. In fact, a couple of the kids, I know one has gone on to Shark Tank and gotten an investment from there as well. So it's some great stories.
That
great
is a
stories.
that is a terrific story, and one that makes me happy to hear, because when I look back on my own life, I'm not even sure I would have spent much time, frankly, suffering in for many years in corporate America. I mean, there were parts of it that I enjoyed a lot, but I never knew about that you could start your own business. And what a great way to expose kids to the idea of being an entrepreneur and alternative careers. And something that I know you and I touched on when we spoke earlier, which is that, and you alluded to it with Motorola, and we were comparing notes about both of our experience with global businesses and international operations. There are so many ways that employees today need to think entrepreneurially, even if they're working in a larger organization, right? So this is great, because it helps teach kids skills that are going to be important for a lot of them as their career evolves, probably faster and faster, frankly, changing faster and faster as they grow up and join the workforce, right?
Absolutely, Doris. Absolutely. And I think, I've often said to the students that I work with that it's not just skills if you're going to start your own business. I mean, you really think in terms of, we spend a good deal of time having them actually do presentations in front of the group. And it's a great skill set. I mean, we're talking about the pitch deck today, but as you know, in all aspects of business, just the ability to communicate effectively, to tell your story, to demonstrate energy, enthusiasm, all of those are important skills. And, whether they're pitching themselves for a scholarship to go on to college, or they're talking about a business, or they're talking about some other aspect of their life. I mean, those are tools that they will continue to use along the way.
Absolutely agree. And I think not just giving a good presentation, but the ability to persuade. There's so many things that you want to try to accomplish in your personal and business life that require persuasive skills. And so I think that's a good segue into the pitch deck, because really the pitch deck is a way to help persuade. And I think you alluded to that at the end, one of the three key elements is a call to action, which obviously is another way of saying you try to persuade somebody and then you want them to actually act on that. So let's dig into the pitch deck itself. So why should a startup create a pitch deck?
I think the ability for a startup to both effectively and really efficiently, and that's an important element of it, to tell their story, to talk about the business venture. I mean, typically, if people are starting a business, they're pretty excited about it. And one of the disciplines that they have to get into is, how do you make this an efficient? How do you synthesize this? Because you can kind of go on and on, especially when you're really into it. And so it's that ability to put that together and tell their story. And, most of us think that it's all about getting financial support. And that's an important element of it. But really, the pitch deck is used along the way. You're doing it when you're looking for prospective partners for your business. Yeah. You might be doing it if you're looking to hire somebody. So how do you get an employee, a prospective employee, excited? You might do it for trade groups. There's a lot of organizations that have grant making. They have pitch competitions, so you can get funding for it that way. And sometimes it's just having your opportunity to tell your story in front of friends, in front of family members. I mean, most people know who have started their own company that in the early days, it's friends and family who are funding. So
right.
You've got to be able to tell your story to them as well. So I think it's not only for that investment community, it's a real broad-based in terms of how you're doing that.
What should startups hope to accomplish with their pitch deck?
Well, we talked about it a little earlier, Doris. I think the most important thing that they hope to accomplish with it is ideally they hope that their audience is going to take some action as a result of what they heard. You certainly hope you're going to connect. You hope you're going to create an emotional bond with the group that your audience you're presenting to. But at the end of the day, with your pitch deck, you would like something to occur as a result of that. You'd like them, you think in terms of Shark Tank, what are they looking for? They're looking for someone to make an investment, someone to become a partner with them. You can do a great pitch, but if it doesn't result in some action that takes place, okay, then it was maybe just good entertainment. And
Right.
most of the people don't want to spend a lot of their time just doing that. You come off and say, well, that was kind of fun, and everybody applauded, but nothing happened as a result of it.
Right, absolutely. So you see a lot of pitch decks. I hate to think how many you've probably seen in the course of your career in some form or another. And you've seen a lot of good ones and bad ones. What should a good pitch deck always include?
Well, you're right. I mean, there are a lot of different components of your business that you might want to talk about. And it's a little bit different with each company, and it's a little bit different depending on the audience that you're working with. But really, a pitch deck should include a variety of elements, and most of them are kind of 10 to 12 slides. That's what I've seen most of the really effective pitch decks go through. And I think they go through a whole process of talking about who they are. And that's kind of an overview of the business, kind of giving a brief overview of who they're about. Then it's how big this opportunity is. What's happening in the market? Why is this a good time for this idea to take place? The problem. What problem are they trying to solve? This is one that's so interesting because people tend to want to focus on their solution or their idea.
Right.
Really,
They want to focus on features and benefits as opposed to,
exactly.
whether
the
there's a
real
need.
problem. Yeah, absolutely. Here's an interesting statistic, Doris, when you talk about problem. That, I know you probably know this, but in the small business world, about half of the small businesses fail in the first 5 years. And of those, the vast majority fail because there's no market need. And this is astounding, but we get so excited about our idea and about a solution that we don't really focus on what problem are we trying to solve when we go through here. And so identifying that and being very clear about it is critical. Solution. How are you going to solve that problem? Not only how are you going to solve it, but what makes you unique in the marketplace? What makes you different than the other companies out there that are maybe addressing the same problem? Traction. The investors, people want to know what demonstrates traction. Now, obviously, a lot of people look at it in terms of saying, well, I want to tell about how many sales I've gotten. But there's a lot of ways today you can talk about traction. How many followers do you have? Social media. How many hits do you have on your website? How many people have gone from not your first page of your website, but they've gone through other pages of your site? So identifying that and being able to communicate it. Of course, the market and how big the market is and who your customer is. I'll tell you a story. I was doing some mentoring at a university level, and the professor would go around with the felt tip pen and he'd toss it at one of the students. He'd say, go up to the whiteboard, tell us everything about your customer. Who's your ideal customer? What do they do? What do they read? How do they find out about new businesses? So understanding that market and that customer is something that most investors want to know that you get. You understand who that's all about. Mm-hmm. Competition, of course. Here's a crazy thing. We work with so many startups and new companies. I've done it for so many years, and so frequently I'll say, so who are you going to compete with? Who do you compete with? And I know you've heard this too, Doris. And so no one's doing this. I said, really? Nobody?
Yeah, we're the first.
Nobody? Nope. We're the only ones. It's my idea. It's so fresh and new. Okay. And, and so usually it doesn't take too long when you do a little search and you say, I just found 3 other companies. No, I didn't.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because my guest last week was the founder of one of the accelerators in the area, a company called Generator, which you probably heard of. And he said, that you need to really be prepared when, because they're an investor, right? And so they have people pitching to them all the time. And he said one of the worst is when, we'll ask people who their competition is, and they'll say nobody, just like you said. We're totally unique. And he said, one of us will just Google and come up with and say, well, what about this company? What do they do? And how are you different from them? And he said, if you can't answer that, you're pretty much toast. It's the end of the interview right there.
Yeah. That's absolutely it. And it's always shocking to me how someone looks like a deer in the headlights when you ask that question. You ask the name of the company, and they say, I don't know. Okay. So that tells me a lot right there.
Well, right. His point was you need to know as much about the marketplace that you're proposing to be in or planning to be in as anybody out there. So, do your homework, for heaven's sakes.
Yeah. One of the areas that I saw very effectively when I actually do this presentation for workshops, I use an example of Airbnb, who has a really well done pitch deck. I mean, there are many really well done, but Airbnb has really good. And for competition, they actually do a matrix where they plot all of their competitors and themselves in terms of performance. And then they go on to talk about, and here's what makes us different. And that's a real key here. What's your unique value prop? What's going to make you different than your competitors? It's not that there's not out there. They are out there, but here's what makes us unique.
Right.
You want to be able to communicate how you're going to make money. So a little bit about your business model. You want to talk about your team and not just name names. You want to talk about the unique skills that this team brings together that are going to help drive this solution into the market. I remember talking with some investors that say, frequently we invest in the people. The idea is an element of it, but we really want to know these are people who can execute on this and make it a success. And so that's an important element. And then finally, especially for an investor, how are you going to use the funds? And it's not just the ask. You're going to make the ask, but more importantly is you've got to be pretty detailed of how you're going to use them. And in fact, what's your timeline? Here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to do over this period of time. Here's what you can expect. Most good investors, they're going to want to meet with you on a regular basis to make sure that you're performing to what you projected, what you committed that you were going to do. So those are just 10. You could use a wide variety. I know sometimes people have included things on patents that they've secured. That's important. You could do that under traction, or you could make that a separate category. Sometimes people have shown sales funnels because they're very proud of that. They've had a lot of success. So these are not the only ones, but these are the ones, if you look up a lot of the best pitches, you'll find that most of them include some element of what I've just shared with you.
Phenomenal advice, and I hope people were taking notes as they're listening to this. You said something that really struck me, and I think maybe was one of the biggest mistakes that I have made and folks that I've worked with in starting businesses have made, which is the last point you made about how you're going to spend the money. I think that is much harder than it sounds, because a lot of people come into a business and they have this idea because they're a subject matter expert, or they have particular skills that have led them to the idea. And yet, that's a really different thing than figuring out of all the things you could spend money on, and there's lots of them when you're starting out, what makes the most sense from a really hard-nosed business standpoint. What advice can you offer for entrepreneurs about that?
I think you're absolutely right, Doris. And I would say you need to take the time ahead of time to think through this and to get some good counsel along the way. One of the things that I've always encouraged startups to do fairly early on in the process is to put together an advisory board of really smart folks who are knowledgeable about the industry that you're looking to work in, who are familiar with some of the companies there, some of the groups, and to work with them to get some feedback, to help you through the process from a preparation standpoint of when I do this ask, where should I be focusing in the early stage? A good advisory board has hopefully gone through this themselves. Hopefully on your board, you've got some folks who have started not just one company, maybe they've started a number of companies, or maybe they've actually been in investor groups and they've been on the board. So they've got a pretty good sense of what the investor groups are going to be looking for. And, you know, that's the whole idea of mentoring, right, Doris? I mean, you do that with companies. I do that. There's many, many people out there that are willing to provide this help for you to kind of think through it ahead of time. You don't want to wing this. This is the close, if you will. This is what it's all building up for. And so you don't want to just throw this together at the last minute. This should be one of the first things you're working on.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Chris, I need to ask you to hold your thoughts for just a second. We need to take a quick break for station identification and a word from a few of our sponsors. Folks, we'll be right back with Chris Banakis talking about putting together a winning pitch deck. This is Doris Nagel, and you're listening to the Savvy Entrepreneur Show. Our guest this week is Chris Banakis, who is the founder of Acuity Advisory Services, which helps small businesses put together their strategy. And he's also a SCORE mentor and advisor. And hopefully we'll get a chance to talk a little bit more about both of those organizations here in the second half of the hour. Now, in the first half, we talked about with Chris about what elements should be in a great pitch deck. And Chris, you know, we didn't talk about one area that I know you're passionate about, and I think maybe is related to where to start, because I know it's one thing to refine a deck and have people say, well, you should include, you know, more market sizing information or more about what customers want or your pricing model. But I think a lot of people struggle with where the heck to start. It's really hard when you're looking at that blank computer screen or blank presentation. And I know you're really passionate about storytelling. So how does storytelling fit into the process, and how can that help entrepreneurs get started putting their pitch deck together?
Well, you're right, Doris. I mean, I think that's one of the most important aspects of it. You know, today we hear a lot of people that will say, hey, tell me your story. And most of us think that's in terms of, I want to give you my resume, right?
Yeah.
I want to tell you where I grew up and where I went to school and how many jobs I had. They really want to hear your story. And what a story enables you to do is humanize your pitch. You know, you're trying to create some emotion. You're trying to connect with your audience. Most of us can remember listening to a presentation that really struck us, that really captured us. You know, what I always say to the folks that I'm working with is, you want to get your audience nodding. You want to get them where they're engaged. And, you know, especially when you think of investment community, Doris, these are folks that see loads and loads of presentations. If you're not capturing their attention quickly, it's gone. It's gone. I mean, they'll just cut you right off and say, good, hey, thanks. And then they're off to something else. And so it's important to create some emotion. One of my favorite stories actually happened at the high school level. And this was the first year that the program was launched at Barrington High School. And one of the winning groups was a group called Find My Bus. Find My Bus, the US. This was in 2013. So here's the story with this. The fellow who headed up that team, this young guy's sister had a disability. So it was very hard for her to have to wait outside in a cold Chicago winter for the school bus. Because in many instances, you didn't know when that bus was going to arrive. And he had grown up with his sister and seen how difficult it was for her. And so he began his presentation by showing a picture and telling the story of how difficult it was and what she had to overcome with that. And then the solution was to actually be able to track the school bus in the same way you might do your Uber car today, right? So that you could stay inside, you could track that bus, and then go out with just a few minutes to spare when the bus was getting ready to pull up. Now, it just captured the entire investment panel because this was somebody speaking from his heart. He had a real life story that he was telling, and he was talking about overcoming this difficulty. And, you know, that's a pretty positive, or not only positive, but pretty effective way to start. You know, most of us think in terms of dumping a bunch of PowerPoint slides, but there is nothing to replace just that impact and the persuasiveness of a good story on the front end. So you ask, well, how do you start putting your pitch together? I think in terms of a storyboard, and what I always encourage the groups I work with is to actually think in terms of a room where you take your slides, or you take just a sheet of paper and you put it up with kind of that first group and you put it up on the wall. And then you're kind of looking at it around, how does this information tell my story? What are we communicating here? So, you know, I gave you some ideas earlier in the segment about some of the slides you could do. There's a whole variety. Part of it is, what story do I want to tell? And so sometimes just putting it up on the wall and looking at it as a team and moving those slides, saying, oh, let's move this over here. I think this would be more effective, is a great way to begin the process of framing the story as you go through. And then thinking in terms of, do I have a backstory? Maybe something about your life, maybe some way that you got started. Maybe it was a great-great-grandfather that started you down this path. So there's a variety of different ways to tell stories. You don't want it to be phony. You don't want to just make something up. But you know, sometimes it's just customer story. Maybe it's something customers told you about why they needed this solution in the marketplace.
Well, you raise a good point, because I think a successful entrepreneur really needs to be passionate about what they're doing. It requires a lot of sacrifice, often a lot of financial sacrifice, but a lot of long hours too. And obviously there's a lot of things you won't be doing if you were trying to get a business started. So you've got to have passion. And so all it really is figuring out, why are you so passionate about doing this, right? And how do you tell that story in a relatable way to people so they understand why you're so passionate about it?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, Doris, because one of the things that I like to highlight, there's a gentleman, Simon Sinek, and he does he does a presentation around the golden circle. And if you haven't seen it, you can go into YouTube and check it out, but it's just interesting. And in this story, he says the golden circle has three elements to it. The beginning is what you do. And a lot of people want to tell you what they do. And then the second is maybe they want to tell you how they do it. give you something. But the most successful organizations, the most successful people are, why? Why do you do what you do? I mean, there's a lot of ways you could spend your time and energy and money. Why are you doing this, whatever it might be? And that's where you can really, that's where your passion can come out. That's where you have a chance to really impact an investor. Remember earlier we talked about the fact that people investors invest in people as much as they invest in the idea, but they want to know you're passionate enough to deal with the tough parts, because most good entrepreneurs will tell you there are a lot of bumps along the way. And,
Not all sunshine and rainbows and unicorns.
Oh my gosh. And if you don't have that kind of energy and enthusiasm and passion around it, you're not going to make it. You're not going to make it through. You're not going to be one of the successful ones. So that's an important part, hopefully, of what you're trying to communicate.
Yeah. Well, I alluded to the fact that you've probably seen a lot of pitch decks over the years, and I think you pretty much concluded that's probably true. So I have to imagine you've seen some of the best and some of the worst. So talk about some of the most common mistakes people make with their pitch decks and what they ought to think about instead as a recommendation for them.
Well, I think the first one that comes to mind, Doris, when we talk about the mistakes, are not knowing your audience. Sometimes we get ourselves in a situation where we have only one pitch deck, and it's so many slides, and I can only do. So not knowing your audience can really become a challenge for a lot of people. I'll tell you a story about this with one of the clients that I work with. So this gentleman was trying to get a meeting with a large investor, and he'd been trying for a long time, and we talked about an advisory board. Well, a member of the advisory board had given him some contact information. He was making the phone call simply to set up an appointment. That was the whole purpose of making the call. Lo and behold, he got through. Turns out that it forwarded to the cell phone, and there's the investor on the phone, and he explained he wanted to get an appointment. He wanted to set up an appointment. And the investor said, you know what? I just left the airport. I've got about 40 minutes until I get home. He said, let's do it right now. Well, the fellow wasn't ready. That whole purpose was to get an appointment. Then I was going to practice. Then I was going to be ready. But here's an example, because he really didn't know his audience, hadn't prepared for the eventuality that might happen. He was completely stuck and really struggled. And he said, I learned a valuable lesson.
Yeah, the opportunity of a lifetime just went right out the door.
Exactly. So that's an important aspect. You've got to, and that changes all the time. You have different audiences. You've got to prepare accordingly. Not practicing ahead of time. I will see, especially newer entrepreneurs, reading their pitch deck. You first of all, you don't want a lot of words on there anyway. You don't want to be reading. It's not a script. It's simply images that are going to prompt you into telling more about your business or about your story as you go through. So you need to practice so that you're very comfortable talking about it. And you need to be flexible. Part of the issue is controlling the meeting. Sometimes that's hard. Again, if you're with very skilled entrepreneurs, that can be difficult. But I'll tell you another story. I was with one of my clients when they were making a pitch, and they had made an appointment, and it was great. And we went down, and we were waiting in the lobby, and a person came down, and we were thinking we were going to go to a conference room, and we were going to be able to make. And again, they threw a curve, and they said, "No, let's do it right here." Well, you're in the middle of a lobby. There's people coming around. There's folks drinking coffee. So it wasn't the ideal environment, but you've got to be flexible enough And you can't get too locked into there's only one way this is going to happen, knowing that, things can change along the way.
So Chris, do you think that there are some investors who do that on purpose just to see if you're nimble enough to roll with it?
Yes, and yes. Absolutely. I absolutely do. Because think about this. I mean, if you're in that same situation, Doris, you're thinking, hey, if you really know your business, if you really understand the market, if you really understand the competition, if you understand, you got to be able to talk about that and deal with the questions as they come up. And that really leads me into the other point I would make, and that is not anticipating the questions that you might get. I worked with a group at the high school level, and they were terrific, Doris. They had a great idea and a great program. They made it all the way to the nationals to present this. And they spent most of their time fine-tuning their presentation, and they had it down really well, but they didn't spend time anticipating questions. And when the questions started coming, they were stuck. No, they had not figured out who was going to handle what questions, what might come, how to deal with that. I remember even during my corporate days, having somebody, we'd be going in and we'd make a pitch, and the client would say, well, your price is too high. And we'd be deer in the headlights. And I think, how can that be? How can all of this, that is the most obvious question that we would get.
Right.
And then we don't have an answer for that. So I think that happens with pitch decks as well. You've got to anticipate what those questions are going to be and prepare for them.
Yeah. Well, and you've made the point really in several different ways as we've chatted that you need to be very careful as an entrepreneur not to avoid tunnel vision, because it's really easy to be convinced your idea is the best one, or that your strategy or your business model is the best one. And people start to make the business about themselves. And, I think your advice about getting an advisory board, or at a minimum, looking for outside advisors and people who can give you unbiased feedback. And I'm not talking about your best friend who happens to do something that is tangentially related to what you want to do. I'm talking about people who are going to give you the unvarnished truth, and find those people that are really important.
Yeah. Pitching to your mom doesn't always give you the very best input. Because moms love you. They're going to tell you everything was great. So you want to find a little bit of a different audience to really get prepared.
Well, that's not as easy as it sounds, because a lot of people don't want to hurt your feelings, and they think they're doing you, they're helping you by telling you, finding positives, which, most of us as human nature, we hear some positives and we glom onto those positives. We forget about all the sort of, but maybe you should, and that all gets lost in the process. And so being able to be brave enough and open enough to hear and really, really pursue some of the negative or less than positive comments you get, and really dig into those is important, not just with a good pitch deck, but frankly, with any great business idea.
No, you're right. And I think that's all part of the process of learning, and the whole idea of either pivoting because you've learned from something and you're going to do something a little different, or persevere and continue to go forward with it. I would just mention one more thing, Doris, when we talk about a little bit about mistakes. One of the things that I always encourage is that you've got to follow up after you've done the pitch. You've got to follow up with the group, whether it's in writing, whether it's a call, whether it's a quick note, but you can't just leave that hanging out there. Sometimes, again, and sometimes at two levels of this. If the pitch went really, really well, sometimes we forget about following up because we're so excited that we felt really good about it and it went well. And other times, if we think it didn't go well, we spend a lot of time concerned about that and not following up. So both of those elements can cause people to not follow up when they actually should be spending some time doing that.
Interesting. Well, let's talk just a little bit about how Acuity Advisory Services helps companies with their pitch decks and their business strategies getting started, and also how SCORE helps them.
Well, that's great. I mean, we try to do exactly what we're talking about. We try to help them think through new market segments that they'd like to pursue. And that's a very effective way for companies to grow their business, is to think about new markets that they may want to enter into. And that can be, as I mentioned earlier, a vertical market. It can be just a new geographic market that they haven't entered into, but that's an important element, and there's a lot of strategy that goes into how you do that and how you make that move. And let's talk a little bit about SCORE. I mean, SCORE is a wonderful, I have loved my time with SCORE, and they're probably one of the best kept secrets, quite honestly, Doris.
Yeah, and I'm astounded still at the number of people that I come across who are either business advisors or are entrepreneurs or wannabe entrepreneurs who've never heard of SCORE. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, SCORE's been around since 1964, and they're resource partner of the SBA, the Small Business Administration. And over the time, they've worked with probably 11 million entrepreneurs. And here's the interest. 11 million entrepreneurs and around the country. And here's the amazing part. It's free. It's free mentoring. It's free workshops. It's free educational resources. I mean, if you go on the SCORE site and you look up a certain industry, a certain skill set that you're looking for, you can find a SCORE mentor that can help you out. Or if you're working with a SCORE mentor, they'll bring in other SCORE mentors that have certain skill sets. And one of the things that's really been interesting to us this past year, we've been doing a lot more via video and phone and email, but what it's enabled the clients to do is actually tap into folks. You may find somebody in Southern California that has the skill that you're looking for, and doing video mentoring, you can do it wherever you are. And so you're not limited to a geographic location and the people that are there. And really what SCORE tries to do is they really try to get business communities, really build kind of a vibrant business community. And they've got somewhere in the neighborhood of 11,000 volunteers nationwide, about 300 chapters. Well, I'm part of the North Cook and Lake County chapter here in the Chicagoland area. We've got about 60 mentors, and we conduct workshops in the area. Up until the time that we had the pandemic, we did a lot of workshops at a lot of the libraries. We partner with them. I actually got involved through a friend that I had worked with in Asia. He was very active at SCORE. He thought it was an organization I would enjoy being part of, and he's absolutely right. I have just found them to be a dynamic organization with just a great group of people. And I would tell you, if you're a small business, I know you don't have a lot of money right now that you're working with, this is an organization you should at least check out. Hopefully you'll be pleased with the people that you're working with. And one of the things to keep in mind is if you're not clicking with one of the mentors, there's other mentors. So check it out and see what you can find.
And I think the other thing too is that you may be able to tap into different advisors for different things. So let's say, for example, you're not sure if your presentation skills are the best. You can tap into somebody who really is great at that, who can give you some feedback and maybe help you with some other resources with that. Or One of the things I've seen a lot, unfortunately, is people that the content of their deck is probably good, but the layout, the graphics, just making it easy on the eye, maybe you need some work with that. There's probably somebody in SCORE who can help you with both of those things or other areas of your pitch deck, right?
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah, and SCORE mentors, we identify skill sets of team members. And so, for instance, I've had a number of instances where I've been mentoring a client, and we start out maybe working in one area, and then they'll come forward and say, I've got some tax questions. And I said, well, that's not my area, but I can find one of the folks from the team that can help you out with that. We'll bring them in, and maybe we'll have a conference call. Maybe we'll bring them in person, once we get back to doing that. But you're right, Doris. I mean, that's a wonderful thing about it. These are people that just feel that they've been very blessed over the years. They want to be able to give back. And this is a wonderful way for them to do it. And so it's a great organization. So hopefully people will give it a shot.
So, Chris, any final words of advice for entrepreneurs who are interested in creating a winning pitch deck?
So, Doris, I'd have three final thoughts. One is it's important to note that you can have a great idea, but if you can't convince others to buy into that idea, it really doesn't matter. That being said, a pitch deck really does enable you to inspire, motivate, ultimately to persuade others to take a desired course of action. And finally, the most inspiring entrepreneurs use stories, and they do it to establish trust. They build a deeper emotional relationship with their audience. I'd like to share just some resources that I've used over the years in creating pitch decks. One is a book called Get Backed, B-A-C-K-E-D. It's by Evan Bayer and Evan Loomis. It's a terrific book, Doris. It not only talks about pitch decks, it also talks about financing and investments. A great resource tool. Secondly is Steve Blank, who is a serial entrepreneur and Stanford professor. He has a website called steveblank.com. It is filled with free information, presentations, documents that I think entrepreneurs will really enjoy going through. And finally, there's a book from Carmen Gallo called The Storyteller's Secret. Again, it gives you a chance to read some of the great presentations, some of the great stories that have been told, and some of the really gifted presenters over the years. So those three, I think, hopefully will be helpful for those listening in. And again, I'm happy to help out with any folks who would like to just reach out directly to me.
So last question for you, Chris. If people are interested in more information, either about Acuity Advisory Services or SCORE, or they just want to, brainstorm with you about pitch decks, what's the best way for them to reach you?
So I think the best way is certainly, since we've highlighted SCORE, and that's important, is just putting my name in and it's a SCORE mentor, and we can start from there. My email is chris.banakis@scorevolunteer.org. Spell
your name just to make sure people can find you.
CHRIS.BANAKIS@scorevolunteer.org. I'll be there and love to help you out if you need some help, at least get you started or at least get you pointed in a good direction.
Really terrific information. Chris, thanks so much for being my guest this week. It was great having you on the show. Really appreciate your time and insights.
Thank you, Doris. It was my pleasure. And all the best to a very healthy and successful 2021.
Thank you. Same to you. That's our show for this week, folks. Thanks so much for listening. And thanks again, especially to our guest today, Chris Banakis, the founder of Acuity Advisory Partners, as well as a SCORE advisor and mentor, talking about how to create a winning pitch deck. You can find more helpful information and resources on my website, globalocityservices.com. There's a library there of free blogs, tools, podcasts, and other resources. I'd always love to hear from you. You can email me at any time with suggestions, comments, or challenges that you're having at dnagel, Nagel, at lakes, plural, lakesradio.org. I promise I'll respond. I'd love to hear from you. Now, be sure to join me again next Saturday at 11 a.m. Central Time, noon Eastern. We'll have another great guest and topic. But until then, I'm Doris Nagel, wishing you happy entrepreneuring.